Hi folks, this is Takota Coen here with another video interview for the Optimal Human Health series, where we're interviewing experts in the health and wellness realm so we can better understand how we can heal ourselves and in turn heal the planet. Today I'm going to be interviewing Malcolm Saunders from Calgary, Alberta, and we're going to be talking all about superfoods. So Malcolm, thanks for taking the time to sit down with us today. Why don't you tell us a bit about your story and what got you interested in superfoods and their relationship to human health?
All right, right on. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. Thanks for those that are tuning in and listening. I know we're going to have a good full-on hour diving into, superfoods and more and beyond. What is that? This idea. Let's first maybe establish what that is, because I know that's a term. It's a marketing term. It gets thrown around a lot. People are like, oh, blueberry is a superfood. Broccoli is a superfood. I mean, I lay no claim to what is a superfood. You can very literally simply take it as whatever food you think is super. So there's no strict definitions of this is a superfood and that's not, whatever it is. Let's really explore the heart, really explore the essence of what that is, and then I'll talk about how I came to this. So my definition of a superfood, which again is just my definition, and if it fits for you, you can take it on, expand it as well. So obviously there is that term super, something that's got unique, extraordinary properties. Maybe it's really high amounts of something that's very common, right? Could be high in protein, could be high in certain antioxidants, or it could be something that has very unique properties that's not commonly found, that's hard to get in certain foods, or is just unique within a particular food, and high in those amounts. So that could be a superfood, but ultimately whatever really truly feeds and nourishes you and turns you on, right? I've been working in the health food industry for, probably at least 15 years, running my own business for more than 10, but a number of years before that. And the first kind of quote unquote superfood that kind of really got my attention were hemp seeds. And at the time I was a vegetarian. I'm going to go into that story. I'm going to share, why I was and why I'm not a vegetarian. But that's been an interesting journey. But what really caught my attention were hemp seeds, hemp protein. And working in a health food store, they had just hit the scene, and people could not get enough of them. Like, it was unbelievable, myself included. We're like, whoa, like, what is this food? It felt so good. We were getting so deeply nourished, and there was such an inspiration around it. So to me, like, boom, that's a superfood. It was at that time, and that's how food should be. I've definitely been down all these kinds of diets and paths and dogma and all this stuff, and I'm done with that. It's like I am now so thankfully in a place of what I call intuitive eating, and we'll definitely, I hope we get into that in this interview. What is that? What does that mean? And how can we be in that space? Because I think that's ultimately where the future of nutrition is going, because it needs to, right? I think we're all done with dogma. We're all done with diets, and they can be helpful in terms of, you're learning along the way, along your journey. But man, we got to follow our gut more than nutrition trends, don't we? It's so much more of a freeing space to be in. And I've been in places where, literally, mentally, I'm like, okay, this is what I got to eat. This is what I got to do. I can't do this, and I got to do that. And you can get yourself into some rough places, as I did, but it's all learning. It's all part of the journey. And hopefully what we're going to share today, you can bypass some of that stuff. You can go straight to what your body needs and wants. And this whole idea of nutrition, we can get too much caught in our head of like, oh, this is what I have to do. Where really we should be following our guts, following our inspiration. And that's what this path is all about for me, where you feel the inspiration and you're like, yes, my body wants more of that. And that's what you follow. Another kind of interpretation of superfood is, let's take a classic example of a food. So that would be an apple. Right? We got this saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, which, by the way, that was marketing. That was developed during the temperance movement. It was the church, because, the idea of like Johnny Appleseed, right? At that time with him, all the seeds, spreading all the seeds, the apples. Well, at that time, most people were drinking their apples as hard cider, as liquor, not eating them. And it was the church was like, oh, we can't have this. We got to get people eating them. So then they came up with this whole slogan, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Anyways, apple. So food value, vitamins, minerals, calories, in whatever amounts. Apples are great; they're wonderful. So we can take that classic representation of a food. We should all be eating more apples, yay, and things like it. Good whole foods. Then on the other end of the spectrum, things that we can consume are herbs. And I'll share a little bit about my journey, starting in nutrition, focusing on that, and now really opened up to this idea of herbs. Like it's absolutely a food group. If someone's watching and you're not consuming herbs, you're missing out. As was I. I was born and raised in a family, like still to this day, my father says, I do not believe in herbs. Really? Like, what does that even mean, right? Like, yeah, he's not into plants. He's not into plant medicine, but it's something that I've deeply gotten into and received a ton of benefit from. So why would we take a herb? Well, it's not food. It's not giving us calories. It's not giving us vitamins, minerals, but it plays a very important special role. So herbalism, herbs, this is the idea. It's been the people's medicine all around the world, traditional medicines. And it's not saying we got to do this and not modern medicine, right? It's like, this is kind of the first, this is the foundation. This is what keeps you and your family well every day. And then we can pick and choose other modalities to bring in if and when needed. But we've had a big disconnect between ourselves and food, and most definitely herbs throughout cultures, throughout time. And if we could reconnect back to that realm of herbs. So a herb, let's take echinacea, classic example, right? We're going to take it to boost our immune system. It has a very physiological effect on the body, whereas the food nourishes us. Well, to me, a superfood can be something that's both, right? It can have the vitamins, the minerals, very oftentimes in high properties, unique nutrients that are there, as well as has a herb-like strength, has a physiological effect on the body, beyond just nourishment. So, classic example might be goji berries. A lot of people are like, yeah, gojis are a superfood. Well, you may go to your Chinese doctor. He may prescribe you goji berries for some reason, but you can also just eat them like a food. So as I'm talking about herbs, where I like to introduce people and get them into is this idea of the tonics and the adaptogens. There are a lot of great medicinal herbs, but for those, you need a little bit more know-how. You need maybe work with a practitioner, work with a herbalist. And I give the example of, let's say you have low blood pressure. Well, a certain medicinal herb that might drive up your blood pressure, like raise it because you need to. But what happens when you find that balance, right? When you find the balance, if you continue taking that herb, it's going to continue ramping up your blood pressure because that's the action it has. So then you could find yourself in the opposite scenario. Well, these tonics, these adaptogens, they're what we call dual directional. So whether it's blood pressure, whether it's the immune system, whether, whatever system it is, your body's able to find that balance. Gojis are an example of that. Not specifically for blood pressure, but you know what I mean. So they're safe to take long term. They have nutrients to them, but they also have that physiological effect. So just kind of as a base playing field, as we get into kind of my journey and story, that's what I'm talking about in terms of superfoods. And I'm interested in expanding our diet, right? One of the biggest wrong turns that we took as a society was the industrialization of our food system.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say, paint things as black and white, right and wrong. Like definitely there are a lot of benefits to industrialization, but I think by and large, that's really where a lot of us got lost. And that's the food system that we were born into and we've all inherited. And we have a very low, what I call food intelligence, your FQ, because of modern industrialization, the food that's available, the information that's available, the paths we've taken. Many of us are so lost, we're so confused about food and nutrition. We need to get that one straight. So that's what our goal is here today, right, on the call?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean you've hit on, there's at least 3 or 4 hours of we could chat about any one of those topics. I think you hit the nail right on the head. And the reason why I'm doing these videos is because we have lost our food intelligence, and there are over 100. If you look at the Wikipedia in terms of diets, there's over 100 kind of closet diet terms that you can look at, and within those hundreds, there are sometimes dozens, even more subsets of those diets. And of those, there might be 10 or 15 books on those subsets. And it's no wonder why people are so confused when it comes to diet. And so, my hope with this Optimal Human Health series was to find the people that weren't just, reading books and writing books. They were, they had personal experience, they had gone through health challenges, they have found something that worked for them that was based on science and as well as traditional wisdom, and can pull out some principles from that so that we can see. So that's awesome.
Totally. And so as you're talking about that, let's dive right in. Like, how can someone get straight? How can we increase our food intelligence and quickly? Because, it's true. Like books. I mean, so anyways, I've developed an acronym. It's called the Food Scope. And so if we take that term scope, SCOPE, that's our acronym. And it's like a lens. It's like a magnifying scope. It's something you can look at any food. You can look at any diet out there. Again, of all those like hundreds of diets and then all the subsets of diets, you can very clearly, quickly begin to know if it's right for you. So the first S is science. And as you mentioned, science can be very helpful. But it can also be a bit of a hindrance. We can get lost in the kind of the science and the terms and like, what is an antioxidant? Well, I know I should be eating it. I know I should be eating, like it can get very theoretical and hard to connect to, hard to relate to. However, that being said, science is amazing. It's wonderful. It can tell us what's in a food, right? What nutrients in there and how it affects the body. Those are the two things that science can do for us. Yeah. And one thing we need to keep in mind with that is that nutrition science is still very young, right? I mean, what are they going to discover next, right? At the time, we didn't know what vitamin C was. And I can guarantee you there are still lots of other nutrients that we should be eating every day that we don't yet know, or the effect on our bodies. And also it's limited in its scope, partly for kind of ethical reasons, right? Like a lot of the human-based studies, the trial-based studies, I mean, we're not going to be experimenting with, pregnant mothers, for instance, right? We're not going to have a lot of scientific data around that. Sure, we'll do it for mice, sure, we'll do it for other species, but in terms of human studies, I mean, and it's the reason why you'll very often, you search anything, it's like water. Should I consume while pregnant? Well, consult your doctor. Like there's not enough studies to show. So science, it's great, it's wonderful, but it's also limited. So the next one, so the next one here, S and then C is culture. And Michael Pollan, fantastic food writer. I'm sure you obviously know who Michael Pollan is, but if anyone watching who doesn't and you're into the topic of food, absolutely go grab one of his books, watch his series on Netflix. He wrote the book Cooked. He wrote the book Food Rules, Omnivore's Dilemma, list goes on and on. Absolutely fantastic writer and just a brilliant mind too, and a way to, he really is a big influence in helping setting us all straight on the topic of food. He says culture has more to teach us than science or industry combined about how to eat. And I think that's really true. Of these acronyms, if we think about science, if we think about culture, and if we think about the other ones, if I had to choose one, I would choose culture. And here's the thing, we don't have to choose one. The idea is we're going to look at a food, we're going to look at a diet through all these lenses. So science is just one. And I know a lot of people, and I'm not putting down science. I think it's great. It's wonderful. It's absolutely valid and needed. But there can be a lot of people like, well, if science hasn't said so, it's like, well, there's more to it than just science. Yeah. Let's put it in perspective. So culture, absolutely invaluable because it shares how humans have survived throughout time, right? They've been successful. And culture encodes food and nutrition information that's been gathered over generations. Very valuable, very key. However, as helpful as it can also be a bit of a hindrance. We can get lost in it too because cultures weren't perfect, right? They were also limited by their time, their geography, their understanding and knowledge. And we live in a very different time with different, maybe similar geography, but, our lifestyles, like living inside, doing the jobs and things we do. I know a lot of people get into, traditional diets, paleo, this, that, the next. And okay, I got to eat protein, I got to eat fat, and they eat their 4 sausages and 6 eggs and bacon and, And then they go to work and they sit for the rest of the day. Well, Your ancestors weren't doing that, like, or they're buying, I remember this one couple, like they got all, we're into the paleo diet. And, it's like, okay, great. Like, wonderful. What do you eat? Where do you shop? They go to Costco and they load up on like, all this meat. And it's like, no, you're going to run into troubles with that too. So we're going to apply a little bit of intelligence if we're going to adopt the ways of our ancestors, truly look at, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and then apply it to our life. Other thing, so culture, amazing, lot of wisdom that we can gather there, but keep it in perspective. So the next one would be O, and that is opinions of others. Now, I might think, I don't just listen and follow others. Well, you do, and you should. It's very valuable, but we got to keep it in context, right? So, I'm big into wild water, spring water, going to the source of a spring, drinking straight out of the ground. I grew up, I never would have done that, right? We was taught this fear of anything wild, especially water. Could be contaminated. And it took, a friend of mine going like, no way, this is awesome. You got to try it. And me going like, okay, if you're doing it, I'm going to try it. And, his opinion was very valuable to me. Absolutely love it. Love spring water. However, I've also gotten myself into trouble, following those diets. For me, I was a raw foodist, raw vegan for a number of years. And again, everyone's opinions like, wow, read the books, all the testimonials, everyone's having such great results. But what I didn't put into perspective was, okay, who are these people, right? Most of them were male, most of them were single, most of them were in their 30s, most of them had been on the diet for less than 5 years, right? So if I'd actually like applied a bit of intelligence, a bit broader thinking, I would have gotten to that conclusion a lot quicker and not having dragged my family through it, right? Like, my partner at the time, like she was pregnant, we gave birth to our daughter, like they were on the raw food diet and, that wasn't a good thing, right? Again, if I looked at cultures, every culture has a special diet, to prepare, preconception, during that whole conception period, and then post as well. And raw food diet was like, well, just eat more kale, like drink more green juice. Those are not that, not what you want to say to a pregnant, breastfeeding mother. There's not enough calories. There's not enough nutrition, not enough fat in a plant-based diet to build the brain and the nervous system of another being. Not with depleting the mother immensely. And then hence, that's why there's that period of replenishment that every culture set mothers up to go through. I think the Chinese, they call it like the golden window. It's like 30 days after pregnancy was so critical, so essential. And then they would space out, the number of years between births as well. So both parents had time to regenerate, rejuvenate through proper nutrition and lifestyle. So opinions, could be extremely valuable. That's why we're having this conversation, right? It's, hey, what's Takota doing? I remember actually one of the raw food people I used to listen to, her and her family had come from Russia, and they popularized the whole green smoothie thing. And when they first got to America, coming from Russia, where access to foods, very limited, what was in the grocery stores, very limited, came to, America, land of the free. Oh my gosh, like such an advanced society, should be walking down the grocery store aisle. And it's like, oh, look at all the selections, look at all the choices, look, like every package is so well laid out. They tell you exactly the vitamins and the minerals in there. It's been fortified, right? And without thought, without concern, just ate the food of the day. And very quickly, within a couple of years, all 4 of them in the family developed some sort of quote unquote irreversible health condition, diabetes, heart disease, so on and so forth, that they were each told like, this is your lot in life, like you just have to deal with it. And she didn't accept that answer from the doctor. And, she went around like literally she'd be standing in the bank lineup. And if someone in front of her or behind her, like looked remotely healthy, she'd be like, what are you doing? Like, what are you eating? Like, how do I figure this out? And she just was asking people constantly and just trying to piece it together for herself that way. So it can be, but again, we got to put it in perspective about opinions. And ultimately it comes down to this last lens, this last P and E in the acronym, which is personal experience, right? How does it work for you? Because science may say, oh yeah, X food, super high in this, look at all its benefits, and everyone's living longer because we're eating it, da 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 da. But you eat it and gives you a stomach ache, right? Or whatever the reaction is. Culture can say all it wants about it. Other people can rave about it, but does it work for you? And again, it's not the be all end all. We still need the S, the C, and the O, because I could be stupid. I'll be like, nope, if I haven't experienced it, I'm not going to take science word for it, nothing. I have to experience it myself. I'm going to go out to the forest. I'm going to eat that mushroom. Well, it'd be pretty silly to not heed the wisdom of science, not heed the wisdom of culture and other people telling you, no, that one's poisonous. It all sounds kind of rather obvious on the surface, but there's a lot of power and a lot of depth if, as we approach new information, let's check the science, let's check the culture, let's check opinions, and then how does it work for me? A good example of that was, again, kind of through my raw food days, flax. That was something I came across, it was like, oh, great, science says really high in omega-3s, good fiber, so on and so forth, has all these benefits. Great, wonderful, check that box. Opinions, everyone else is raving about it. Personal experience, well, it seems to be fine. I'm eating it, I'm making all these recipes with it. But once I applied it through the culture lens, it's like, wait a minute here. Do any cultures, have they actually ever consumed flax as a food? Mm-hmm. Turns out, no. Right? Flax typically has been an industrial seed, linseed, right? It was used as an oil. It was used industrially. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very scarcely was it ever used as a food. Maybe it was used as a medicine. I was teaching this one time, and a woman came out to me. She's like, yeah, that's right. She's like, when I got into flax, Mom says, you're crazy. That's the food we feed to the pigs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what came up was around that time, everyone started getting into chia. And I was like, oh, okay, well, science says, yeah, high omega-3s, soluble fiber, blah, 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 kind of the same. Culturally, yes, it has a history. It has a history of people using it traditionally as a staple food. And it was a very quick, easy switch for me to go right there. So.
That's an awesome lens. I've never heard anybody put that together so eloquently, and I really like that process, because it really does hit all the, from my own journey through what sounds like very similar. I went from vegan to vegetarian. I was born and raised an omnivore, eating basically 100% of our own food, and then went away from the farm and just got totally indoctrinated by the kind of culture of the day and other people's opinion. Right. And, I had a lot of health problems, and it took me a couple of years to sort through that. But eventually, my diet now is totally based on it's mostly science, culture, and personal experience. The opinions of others is not so much, but to get me started, it was to find that the kind of what worked for me. But now I really like that. That's amazing, Malcolm.
Cool. Yeah. Well, and that's cool. And I love that word that you just said. This is something that, Denis Manzer, someone that we both know, kind of a colleague of ours, he's like, we got to revive the term omnivore, because he says it all the time, and he's shocked at how many people, have never heard that term or don't like, what are you talking about? Yeah. So let's dive into that omnivore, right? I used to be really into yoga. And that's kind of what led me down this kind of like vegetarian path, the spiritual, Mm-hmm. And in, Eastern traditions, it's all about everything, to be omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was like, well, what about omnivore, right? It's the highest thing. And so again, culturally, one of the things that kind of just snapped for me as I began to question kind of the dogma of vegetarian and vegan, mm-hmm. A friend of mine, Danny Vitalis, he did a seminar here in Calgary, and he's like, all right, I want you to raise your hand, like, who's a vegetarian, and like a number of people, yep. And so then he's like, okay, for 5 years. Okay, yeah, a few more hands go down. 10 years, most of the hands go down. He's like, how about 15 years? No one left. Like, now, do you know anyone It's been 15 years. Okay, maybe another hand or two goes up. 20 years. Okay, another hand goes down. 25 years. Like, and there's always one person, oh yeah, I know this guy who's, he's done it for 40 years and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, okay, that's a bit of a stretch. Do you really know him? Yeah. I lived in raw food communities. I've been around in that world, and the number of like scandals about these like these vegan gurus that come out where they're caught like guzzling chicken or like something on a day off. Like it's like, really, have they really kept to it for 40 years? And even if they have, it's entirely possible. It doesn't mean that, the 99% rest of us of the population, that's who we should follow if they're the absolute rare exception. And again, maybe someone can do it, because I don't want to say what someone can or can't do. It's a very noble thing if that's what they want to pursue. But, how about generationally, right? Like vegetarian. There's no culture in the world. And you could say, oh, what about the Indians? Well, yeah, sure, they're vegetarian, but they eat a ton of dairy. Wow. So when we look at this idea of omnivore, and this is something that Daniel and I have been jamming on for a long time, this idea of the 4 food groups. And these are not the ones we learn in school, by the way, if that's a shocker. So, I think grade 2, and this is part of the reason why our modern culture, our society has such a low food intelligence, is because, the kind of standard, the level, the bar that's set, how we're trained and to eat is Canada Food Guide, which is atrocious. It's not helpful. It's not intelligent. So what is something better? Well, there in fact are 4 food groups, and they are plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi. There's your 4 food groups. Now I challenge you, or anyone listening, because I'm open to it, tell me one food that exists in the world that's outside of those 4 food groups.
Yeah.
There's some that are
apart from sugar.
Right. Yeah, well,
basically that's like the primary food group. I was reading something the other day. Most Americans, it's like a third of their calories come from sugar, or some
right. It's crazy.
Processed carbohydrate.
Yeah. So I could argue, well, sure, great sugar, but that comes from the plant kingdom, right?
It's usually
So there's certain foods that are a crossover. They're both bacteria and fungi, or there's certain foods that are plant and fungi in the case of lichens. And of course, I'm generalizing. I'm putting nature into boxes here, but you can think of those 4 food groups as the 4 kingdoms. And the neat thing is that every single food group, plants, offers something different and unique that you can't find in the animal kingdom, which you can't find in the fungi kingdom, and so on and so forth. Hence, we're omnivores. We need nourishment, food, nutrition from each of those kingdoms. And it doesn't, what it doesn't say, why it's so powerful, is it doesn't tell you what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. That's the personal journey. And it doesn't say you have to eat steak, you have to drink milk. If we look at the animal kingdom as an example, one thing that I had mentioned earlier, I really want to expand, people's perceptions around food, nutrition, and what they eat. Because in the industrialization of our food system, the diversity has gone like this. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the 4 kingdoms, the 4 food groups, the kingdom of plants, the diversity is absolutely massive. And just herbs as an example, if we take herbs as a category within that, so much in there. Plants it's nuts, it's seeds, it's fruits, it's grasses, it's flowers, it's pollens, it's, seaweeds, it's, the list goes on and on and on. And same with animals, right? It's not only, cows, pigs, chickens, etc. It's also insects, right? Like honey would be coming from that animal kingdom. A lot of us aren't too familiar or comfortable with the idea of eating bacteria, right? Fermented foods, absolutely key, essential food group that every single culture around the world, I believe it was Sandor Katz, right? The fermentation revivalist, been at the forefront of bringing this back into human diets. He was searching the world. He's like, I want to find a culture that, well, he didn't want to, but he's like, in order to prove his thesis, he's like, show me a culture that does not ferment. Yeah. And a friend of mine was telling me the story that he was down in Australia because he had heard, well, maybe the Aborigines, maybe they don't ferment. He didn't know too much about their diet. So he went down to Australia, and he was out in the outback, with this elder, and they were in front of this fruit tree, and they were talking about the tree, and Sandor went to go pick up one of the fruits to, he's like, oh, let me try this. He's like, oh, no, we leave that on the ground until it's ready. So hence, there you go. There's the fermentation, the action of bacteria.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, even the animals, like it's very traditional for indigenous cultures, but when they harvest an animal, they don't eat it right away. They will often bury the animal in the ground for 3 or 4 days at a certain depth below the ground. Or the Inuit in the far north, they have I think it's called naktuk is the traditional name for it, where they basically harvest a seal and then carve it out inside, so it's just blubber, and they stuff that full of birds, feathers and all. They sew the head back up, so it's like it's anaerobic, and they bury that in the ground for 6 months.
Wow.
it's like a jelly at the end of it. So
wow, amazing. Eh?
Yeah, this is brilliant. I really like this the 4 food group categories, and I think it's one of the things that I strongly believe as well is that health is a function of diversity of diet, and but it's diversity in scale, time, placement, and form. So it's there's the seasonality of it, there's the quantity of it, like how much you're eating versus fasting, and then all that other stuff. It's like there are so many different ways that you can get diversity into your diet that doesn't just include eating different things. It can be eating the same food differently. Take carrots. You can cook them, you can steam them, you can put them with butter, you can ferment them, you can put them in this kind of ferment, that kind of. And it's like the same food groups. Like we grow most of our own food on the farm, and we only grow. We have about 4 or 5 different kinds of protein and animal fats, and I don't know, 10, 15 different kinds of vegetables, but we have hundreds of diversity in our diet because we eat all those things so differently at different times of the year and different occasions, and it's not boring, and it's really exciting, and it's low tech, it's accessible for people, and it works. So I really like that idea of that 4 food groups. That's perfect.
Totally. And, when it comes to a lot of us are, that are on this health path, like this idea of like whole foods, we think of that in terms of, fruits and vegetables, but somehow we miss that when it comes to animals, right? We're like, what about the whole animal? I never grew up eating any organ meats or bone broths or anything like that,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I was hoping we could touch on tonight, and just to see what your thoughts are on organs and kind of the other parts of animals as a superfood, and what your experiences on that, because from my research into the science and the culture and my own personal experience is that the like between the organs, the bones, and like the fat, that typically makes up 50% of the weight of an animal. And our culture throws that away. Like we've been selling meat direct market to customers for close to 30 years now, and it's really been interesting to see that change. But for up until about 5 years ago, we were charged to have that stuff thrown in the garbage because nobody wanted it. And so what are your thoughts on if you're okay to go down that path for a bit? What are your thoughts on organs and bones and kind of the other components of animals as a superfood?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Obviously, I didn't live back in that time, but I'm told, like this is what traditional peoples would go for first. And I always remembered watching, what was the Kevin Costner movie, Dances with Wolves, right? There's like that one scene, bison, and they took the heart, and it's like that's the first thing, right? When the tongue go for that first. So that's what I'm told. How traditional peoples, how they would harvest the animals and go after that first. Makes sense. From this, again, the science, some of the studies showing that that's where the highest amount of nutrition is. liver as an example. And in some animals to the point where it's actually too high, like hypervitaminosis from, very much northern animals like polar bears. You actually can't eat their liver, and you would have to bury it to keep it away from the dogs. Otherwise, they would become toxic. But we know the old remedy of, cod liver oil, and in fact, studying the Canada Food Guide, which I actually have, if you go back to its earliest inception, had liver as a part of the Canada Food Guide. Its earliest inception, it was on there. And then at some point along the way, it got dropped off, and, we've landed where we are today. Key vital nutrients coming from there. And I've also looked at some studies as well where if you're eating muscle meat, it's too high in, is it methionine, which has been shown to potentially cause cancer, and less is balanced out with the organs, the bones, that basically, again, it's that whole food nutrition.
And the fats as well, the saturated fats and stuff in there,
Yeah, totally. All of this really does beg the question, and we want to make this distinction really early on, is, when you and I talk chicken, we need to clarify, what the source is, how is it's raised. Because again, it comes back to like those paleo folks that I had mentioned, like they were just going to Costco and loading up on, beef steaks. And because they heard, I got to eat fat, I got to eat protein, got to eat animal protein. Well, how it was raised, I know you're very well versed on this, but chicken is not chicken, beef is not beef, milk is not milk. It really comes down to how the animal was cared for, how it was raised, and you can have same animal but completely different nutrition profiles depending on how it was fed and raised.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that we've done on our farm in the last couple of years is we've had our milk-fed pork, our grass-fed beef, and our free-range eggs tested for their omega 3 to 6 ratio. And there's a researcher, he's a neuroscientist out of the University of Toronto, and he compared like the ratio of our meats and eggs to like store-bought stuff. And there's absolutely no comparison. So for example, like, feedlot beef, or if you're going to buy beef from any grocery store, the 3 to 6 ratio is 40 to 1.
Right.
And so the closer to 1 to 1, the better. That's very simplistic, but generally the closer to 1 to 1, those two numbers are, the better. And so feedlot beef is 40 to 1, and our beef was 2 to 1.
Right.
So
wow.
It's just like you're absolutely right. There is no comparison to take a look at feedlot beef, and same thing with our pork. It was way lower than, or the number was way closer to 1 to 1, and our pork actually had omega 3 content, types of omega 3s that are typically only found in seafood because of the diet that we feed them with the fermented grains and the duckweed and things like that. And so one of the things I would really like to touch on a bit more is this the idea of veganism and vegetarianism as well, if you're okay with that, because it's increasingly I see it becoming the norm when like you were saying, just from personal experience and science and culture, it's like it doesn't stand up, and yet the opinion of the World Health Organization, the UN, every Hollywood actor that you can think of, Leonardo DiCaprio going on the UN and saying everybody needs to stop eating meat. It's like, where does it come from? How, what's your process for? Because I'm sure in your line of work, you get a lot of people who are they just watched Forks Over Knives. They just watched what's the other movie that.
Cowspiracy
or the Walking Phoenix. That was the one that did me in. He narrated it.
Okay.
It was like an expose into slaughterhouses. It was just that's the movie that I watched. I was like, all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm not eating meat anymore. Where do you think that opinion stems from? And what's your process for educating people?
Totally. And I would say none of that is wrong, actually, right? Like we don't want to support, those types of feedlots and
Absolutely,
slaughterhouses,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
No, totally. So where I landed was, like it's a half truth,
yes,
right? It's like, yeah, we totally don't want to engage in that system, that industrial, like factory farm. Like it's horrible for the environment, horrible for the animals, horrible for you and for your health. Like absolutely. But the answer isn't, oh, now let's eat, vegetables. Or, in my case, I wasn't a vegetarian. I was a carbitarian. I was eating, like you mentioned, right? Sugar was 90% of my diet. If only it was only 30, right? It was, like it's simple carbs. It doesn't matter. Like it was bread, it was cookies, it was pasta.
yeah,
I was barely eating vegetables. And on my journey, like I did get more and more. And that was one of the benefits. It forced me to get into the diversity of the plant kingdom because I was so committed to the philosophy, this
yeah,
ideology, which for me, part of it, first and foremost, it was environmental.
yep.
All of that, like, oh my gosh, got to save the world, this and that, 100% bought in, which I still am. I'm still very committed to that, but I've just going about it in a different way. And there's the kind of the more spiritual aspects, like super into yoga, that played a big role for me. But how I was able to come out of it and gain more perspective. There's a book, which is not the be all end all, but it was helpful at the time. It was called The Vegetarian Myth,
Yep.
Liera Key.
Yep.
Yeah, so great book. She recounts her whole journey of like really like suffering, after however many decades she was as a vegetarian, as a vegan, and then really started to look at it and not paint it as black and white and go, oh, it's not just plants versus animals. It's more about the system that it comes from. Joel Salatin, I'm sure who he's major inspiration for showing that, working with animals as you guys are, it's sustainable. You can actually like add value to an ecosystem and harvest both plants, animals off of it. Another little element here, I did a talk on this one time. It was called Eating Death. And, here I was, like, oh, I don't, non-harming, And, like, yeah, I want to be as compassionate as possible. But here's the reality. In order for you to live, something else must die.
Yeah.
Something, right? Whether it's plant, whether it's bacteria, whether it's fungi, whether it's an animal. And I was, rightly so, I was placing animals on this really kind of high pedestal of like, oh, I want to be caring, I want to be compassionate. But I didn't give a single thought to any plant life I was eating, despite like being a plant person. Like that's my world. I love plants. Yet I wasn't giving them that same level of like, reverence, right? And yeah, so again, hearing like, oh, traditional cultures, from what I've heard, that you become like it's an adult wisdom. You become an adult when you realize that your life depends on taking the life of something else.
Mm-hmm.
And what a shift, right? Like you can't get away from it, even if it's far removed. Like, Liera Keith talks about, okay, in order to grow your corn and your wheat and your tofu from soybeans, like the amount of loss of habitat, like just from an environmental standpoint, absolutely, like it's tragic, right? Here in Alberta, the native prairie is actually a very diverse ecosystem that has almost been wiped out, to grow canola, right? Because, people think canola oil is a good thing. Well, that's a whole other conversation. But environmentally, just right then and there, like, okay, you're not serving the environment that way. And then the loss of habitat for species like the wild deer, like the Bambis, that I supposedly had so much compassion to. And I'm going a little far here, but, I do have compassion for animals and plants. So how, if I can't avoid killing something, then I've got to make some really good choices. And that's like working with someone like yourself and the family farm that really cares for the animals, that has a relationship, has a connection. I think it was Daniel Vitalis that had kind of posed this idea. It's not a new idea that we're so disconnected from our food chain, but this disconnection to reality of life, and our idea of the world comes through like Disney movies where, like, oh, that hunter, killing Bambi. And, it's because we live in this industrialized society that brings food to us 24/7, 365, we're so disconnected. We don't have even an inkling of reality of what it takes to like bring food to the plate and all the death involved every step of the way. It's a hard truth. It's a hard reality to swallow, but that's the reality. Any way you get out of it. I mean, I lived in a vegan community that was trying to farm without the input of animals. Well, that's pretty difficult too. Everything's interconnected. It's an entire web. And that's the reality. So I think the best choice forward is acknowledging it, doing the best you can with the most amount of reverence, and then that space of gratitude, because every single thing you eat once was alive, has young that it cares for, wants its, just because it's not in our kind of same way, doesn't mean we can or should, discount it or discredit it.
That I really like your idea of the fact that part of growing up or maturing involves acknowledging the fact that in order to live, something else has to die, and that there's a larger cycle and that you're a part of that. And for myself, when I first confronted that dilemma, it was actually through a herbal apprenticeship that I was taking at the time. It was a 2-year herbal apprenticeship with a herbalist out of Red Deer. And, which had us, we were doing all kinds of, amazing research into plants, and I was just blowing my mind. But then we got into like kind of the plant spirit medicine stuff, where it's like, you're, basically communicating with them, and it's like, or hearing these stories, and it's like, oh my God, like, I can't eat animals because they're sentient. Now I can't eat plants because they're sentient. Like, what am I doing?
Right.
I was just this huge dilemma, and it was probably a year or two before I could really navigate out of that. But yeah. I like that idea of the I look back at it, really it was a maturing. And when I see a lot of the discourse around the vegan and vegetarianism, which I'm sure you're aware of, it's very polarizing and negative. Like I've received death threats from vegetarians and vegans. And I know most farmers who are trying to farm in a way that is with the most reverence and respect as possible, regularly receive death threats from people who I completely understand what their goals are, and I was once in that same place. But it's interesting how it's like what happens if you're a child and somebody takes your toy. What do? You lose your mind, like you want to kill them. It's like, they took my toy, but at a certain point you grow out of that childlike state, and I'm just having that connection there. Is like a lot of the people that I've had, like it wasn't even possible to have a dialogue about this issue and to raise some other points, the fact that it's not black and white. And yes, I'm totally against CAFOs and feedlots and animal cruelty, and here's the things that we're doing about it. But it's like, no, if you eat animals, like, you are a murderer, and I'm going to kill you and your family because you're a murderer.
Right? Yeah. There's a bit of hypocrisy going on there.
It is.
Yeah. And it just shows like just such a disconnection to reality. Yeah. No, for sure.
It's the speaking of that, putting your hand up to see how long you've been a vegetarian. I've personally converted 3 or 4 vegetarians now, and the longest term one was 25 years. She'd been a vegetarian for 25 years, and when she ate one of our pork chops, she said she started to cry because like it just felt like her body was like, she was like alive again. And she said she had to snack 24/7 just to feel like she wasn't going to fall asleep. And after starting to eat just a little bit of meat, I think it was like once or twice a week, she went from doing that to eating 1 meal a day and being able to work. Right. It's like, it's unbelievable how the importance of these 4 food groups, and that's amazing. So if there's any vegetarians or vegans out there, you mentioned one book, The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith, which I've also read. I think it's an amazing book. Are there any other resources that can help bring a holistic view of this? It's a really important conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, no, totally. I've mentioned his name a couple times. Danny Vitalis, friend of mine. He's been influential. He's finished it now, but he did a whole series of podcasts called "Rewild Yourself," and there's several conversations around this topic, vegetarian. But ultimately, I think the truth is, I think one of the reasons, there's a couple. Lyra Keith goes into her book, why, the classic angry vegan, like, why does that happen? Well, it's actually a nutrient deficiency at the base of it all. But the other thing too is that I think they're so angry, and I only know this because I can relate to it myself. Like I was so like self-deprecating, so like struggling to be a vegetarian, struggling to be a vegan because of this cause, this righteous cause, like that I fully believe in. And how dare you not be in that same position? How dare you? Like, it was such a struggle. I felt very deficient. And if one can just quiet that for a moment and just be really honest with oneself, I don't think you need any other books, right? Like you said, in the beginning, it's opinions. Like, I started having dreams. As soon as I started actually allowing myself to question it, as soon as I really got honest and looked in the mirror and looked at like the pale complexion of my skin, the fact that I had no energy, the fact that, here I was supposed to be this health food guy, like eating the best diet, like all the different plant superfoods and this and that, yet I was still getting sick constantly. As soon as I got honest about that and really felt into the truth of my being and allowed that conversation to start to happen with myself, like all these things started showing up. It was coming up in dreams. I'd be listening to a podcast and it would be someone that was like, was once a vegetarian, and, like their journey of transformation, all this started coming in. And then, I said, all right, I'm just going to put it all aside, kind of like that woman that you had shared the story about. And I'm just going to feel it. I'm just going to see what happens, right? Because otherwise it was all in my head. Oh yeah, meat's going to rot in your gut, and, drinking milk is death, and blah, blah, blah. It's going to give you mucus and all these stories, right? Is okay. Let me just experience it. So I went out and I admittedly held on a bit of the dogma. I was like, okay, well, I'm still a raw foodist, so I'm going to go eat sushi. And I ate like raw salmon, sashimi, like nothing else, right? The first piece, like, oh my gosh, like it dissolved into my body. Like, my wife and I, we sat there, we ate probably like 6 pieces each. Yeah. Like, okay, that's probably good. Like we walk out the door and we immediately were like, I need more. I want more, right? And we're like too embarrassed to go back in the restaurant and eat again. So we're like, okay, where else can we go? We went to the next restaurant. We ate more sushi. And I felt like I could like swim upstream, It was just like this amazing experience. And then the next thing I ate was raw bison liver. Oh, and wow. Yeah, I felt so high, like so full of energy. Yeah. And that was it. Then the rest of for the next like few months, I just had to catch up mentally to try and make sense of it. My body had the experience. I'd experienced the truth of it. And then I had to reprogram. Then I had to go, okay, you weren't totally wrong. This is a half truth. Everything you've like learned and built up, it's about, animal foods from this system, and how can I start sourcing animal foods from this system and reconcile that and move forward in a better way.
Wow. Malcolm, we're coming up at an hour here, and I have a feeling that we're going to have another conversation, because we barely got into it tonight, but this is I think this is one of the best interviews I've done so far, and it really resonates with me and my experience, and I know a lot of our customers and our viewers are also on the same path and have come to the same personal experience, but because of the opinions of others, like I still and this kind of pulls up another issue which you touched on it on a bit, was this. I'm starting to recognize it now as kind of a postmodernist viewpoint of the world, which is essentially feeling guilty for being alive, and it's something that is super prevalent nowadays. And I struggled with it for years, and it really is. It's a cultural artifact from since the 1930s. It has been really propagated through our universities and our media and just the cultural stories that we tell ourselves. But the central theme is Earth is dying, and it's because humans are bad, and it would be better if we all just went away. And that story is such a disempowering story to be a part of. And for me, that was at the root of why I wanted to stop eating meat, because I saw the suffering that was what was resulting from that. And I didn't want to be part of that suffering, and I didn't want to be a bad person. And so I pulled back. And it's it's a story that we try to talk openly about at our farm and in all of our courses and things like that, because I really see it as one of the root problems with a lot of the things that are happening now. But I can't believe how pervasive it is, even for people who have gone full circle. They were vegans, now they're ethical omnivores, but still there's there's like a wish of but I still think it'd be better if I ate less. It's
Right.
It's hard to wrap my finger, but I see it all the time, and I think we touched that on that a bit, but why don't we?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So here's my one thought about that. If we can't get rid of that guilt, and that's going to be a journey for everyone to kind of move through, at least you can kind of bring in somewhat of an antidote of how can I contribute more? How can I be more of a positive influence, on the world, on the earth, on animals, and you're certainly doing that, right? You're actually giving home and caring for these animals, providing food for people that they can feel better about. And there's a million different ways that this can be done, and everyone has their own path to be able to contribute. And I think that's that idea of bringing in the reverence and the gratitude. Once you come to terms with grips that something's got to die for you to live, well, be in a space of humbleness, of gratitude, and in that sense, we can use a modern term like paying it forward or whatever, right? Show up authentically, make the world a better place in any way that you can, and you move through that,
and just don't waste it. And for me, that's really the core kind of my worldview and my kind of ethos around being is that suffering is a part of life, and but it's just one part. And for you to it doesn't work to ignore it and just push it out into the corner. And so we have to acknowledge it. And when we do that with reverence and humility, it begs the question, if other things are going to suffer so that I can live, I better live a damn good life. And right. I better not try to do less bad and focus all my energy on trying to making myself small. It's no, how can I be the most, powerful, beneficial force on the planet? And that's the core of everything that we do on the farm, and why we've keyed in on food so much, and the nutrient density of food is that because people are so sick, and there's no food intelligence like you say anymore, and as a result of that, people can't give their full gifts to the world. And it's sad, and I see it all the time in the the pale faces, and the 60% of humans in the world right now have some form of chronic, or 60% of mortality in the world is due to chronic disease.
Right.
In the 21st century, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So anyways.
Yeah, no, I love that. What a great sentiment. How can you make the most of life, be that positive force. So what a great note to end on. That was awesome.
Well, and I'll leave you with the final word. I didn't get to ask you any of the questions that I had here, but I'll
I knew that was going to happen. I was totally good at that.
So what okay, let's leave with I'll leave you with this little tidbit is what's one simple thing or a process that, and you've kind of already given it, but maybe just what's something that somebody could do if they're looking to optimize their health, like a little thing, or what's the most common thing that people come to you, they're dealing with health troubles, what's the most common kind of remedy or opinion that you give to people to start off with, to start moving towards optimal human health?
Yeah, totally. Follow your gut, follow your intuition, follow your heart. No matter how far, down the wrong path or whatever, wherever you've gotten yourself, your body has the innate intelligence, the innate wisdom. it is self-healing, self-repairing, self-regenerating. We just got to give it the tools. It's not giving up. It's always going to be sending you messages. And sometimes it does. It'll take a while to be able to listen to the language of your body, to be able to know how it speaks. But there is a voice in there, and it's a journey. So start with that, and always come back to that. Your body knows.
Yeah, perfect. I love it. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me this evening. And folks who are watching this video, thank you guys for taking the time to watch this and to care about your health. It's easy to be nihilistic and to not look after yourself in today's kind of those world myths that we have right now. And it takes courage to want to be the healthiest that you can be, so that you can give your gifts back to the world. And I can't encourage you guys enough to do that. Malcolm, you have a ton of resources and a ton of brilliance that, we saw a tidbit of that tonight, and hopefully we can get you back on again. But where can people go if they're looking to, learn more about the work that you're doing? Share your websites here. I'll post those links down below, but why don't you share a bit about that stuff, and then we'll close off.
Yeah, for sure. So the main company I run is called Light Cellar, LIGHTCELLAR. We're based in Calgary, but we have an online store, lightcellar.ca. And with that, tons of education. I'm doing videos almost every day on Facebook, which we also post to YouTube, Instagram. You can find me, The Malcolmist, on Instagram, and Light Cellar on Instagram, Facebook, etc. That's a great first touch point. If you're ever in Calgary, come visit us. We do classes all the time, the how and why of food nutrition. We talk this kind of philosophical stuff, as well as the practical, like getting back to skills, like how to ferment. In all kinds of different ways. So and we're going to be doing more and more online. So if you're not in Calgary, just connect with us there, and love to be a part of your journey.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.
Right on. Thank you.